Distributed file system. Shared folders, they're nothing new, we've been using them for years. But when you need to access a shared folder on a server, you firstly need to know the name of the server that the share is located on, as well as the name of the share you want to connect to. Now in small organisations with only a few shares, normally this isn't much of a problem. But in large companies with hundreds of servers, remembering both the server name and the share name, well, that can be a real challenge. The Distributed File System, or DFS, alleviates this problem of managing shares that are dispersed over your enterprise by bringing them all into one central share point. Now you can think of this as one master folder that contains all of your other shares inside it, or perhaps a large single list of all your shares. With DFS, one of the chief advantages for your users is that all you need to remember now is just the Dfs namespace. Now Dfs starts with a root namespace, which you can simply think of just like a shared folder. It's this share that'll become the central location where we'll get our users to connect to, and the data that they'll need will be made available under this one single SharePoint. So let's take a look at an example. Let's say that we've got 3 servers here. And we have one of these in London, one of them in New York, and we'll say the other is in Sydney. And on each of these servers here, we've got 4 shares. We'll call them A, B, C, and D. So at this point, we've got 3 servers and 12 shares that our users potentially need to remember. And that is assuming that each user, of course, needs access to the data on each of the other servers. But the reality is, though, that for most people, they might only need access to their local server. But there will, of course, be situations where you might have data on this Sydney server here, and you're a New Yorker, and you'll need to connect over the WAN link to get data off this Sydney server. Now this means, as a user, you're going to need to know what the name of this Sydney server is, as well as the name of the share that you want to connect to in order to retrieve the files that you require. This is really a typical example, but a grossly underestimated one. I myself have been privy to situations where there's hundreds of file servers with thousands of shares in certain environments, and this becomes quite a bit of a problem. But this is where DFS comes into play. DFS allows us to create one single namespace, like a master share if you like, and then have all of these shared folders appear underneath this one share, this one single location. So to the user, all they have to remember is the name of this one share here, and not potentially dozens. Now, since DFS isn't something that's available to you right out of the box, it's a role service that needs to be installed. Firstly, we'll need to go and open up the Server Management console. And up the top here, we're going to click on Roles. Then we'll choose Add Roles. And this is going to start up the Add Role wizard. So we'll click Next. Now, since DFS is part of the File Services role, we'll need to select File Services. And we'll click Next again. We'll get this little bit of blurb of information about the File Services role, and you can read that if you like. For now, I'm just going to click Next. And then we'll need to check the Distributed File System box here, and that's going to include both Dfs Namespaces and Replication, and that's what we want. So we'll click Next. And then it's going to ask us if we'd like to create a namespace now or create one later. Now, since a namespace is the central share point, if you like, this is where we're going to group up a whole bunch of our shares underneath this namespace. So the name itself is pretty important. And since DFS needs a namespace, it's probably better that we do create it now, although you can create it later if you like, but just realize that DFS isn't really going to do anything for you without a namespace. So let's configure it now. I'm going to call my namespace Corp for corporate, and we'll click Next. And here we'll need to decide whether we want to configure a domain-based namespace or a standalone one. Now the difference between the two here is that for a domain-based namespace, this will be stored in Active Directory, and it allows for greater availability due to the namespace being able to be distributed over multiple servers. This means that, let's say we've got 20 file servers located all over the world, and stored on each of our file servers we might have a share called Applications that stores all of our applications such as Microsoft Office, antivirus, things like WinZip, and of course Winstructor videos. Now we could use DFS to maintain a single share called Applications and have the contents replicated to the other application shares automatically. Now this is great because if we update an application, we no longer have to manually update the other 19 shares. Windows 2008 can take care of that for us. Now the other benefit of domain-based namespaces is that they can have fault tolerance. Now that's because the DFS information itself can be stored in Active Directory. So if this server happens to go down, the other domain controllers in our environment still have the DFS namespace information, so not all your users are going to be affected by one server going down. Now it's important that you understand when I use the term fault tolerance, I'm referring to the DFS namespace itself and not the shares themselves. The links to the shares which are stored in Active Directory. This is the namespace information, not the actual data contained in the shares. So the links are fault tolerant, the data's not. Well, not at least as far as DFS is concerned anyway. Now, another difference is the way in which we're going to access the DFS namespace is going to be here using the domain name / the namespace. So in my case, that's winstructorlab.com/corp. Now conversely, with a standalone namespace, this is going to be stored on one server only, and to access the namespace in this scenario, you'll access it using the familiar name of the server DC1 / the DFS namespace. So for greater availability, I'm going to choose the domain-based namespace, and that's most likely what you guys listening to this video are going to choose as well. So we'll leave the default here. We'll click Next. And now we're at the configuration stage of the wizard, and what we'll need to do here is tell the wizard where the shares are that we want to bring in under this parent corp namespace. Because at the moment, all we have is a root share, if you like, this corp namespace, but we've got nothing inside it. So we'll need to locate the shares that we want to appear under this one. So we're going to click Add, then we'll need to locate a folder target, which is a share somewhere in our network that we want to add. So we'll click Browse, and that'll open up a new window where we're able to select a server first of all that we want to locate a share on. So I'm going to leave the default here at this server, which is DC1, and at present, since this is a new server, I don't actually have any shares on it. If I click on Show Shared Folders, you can see that this window is empty. I don't have any shares. So although we can create one here by clicking on New Shared Folder, let's do it the old-fashioned way. We'll go and click on Start, and we'll open up Windows Explorer, and we'll go to our C drive, and I'm going to right-click here and create a new folder, which I'll call Data, and I'm going to right-click on that folder and choose Share, and I'm just going to share this so that everyone has read access to this folder. In fact, I would change that to co-owner, and we'll click Share, and then Done. Alright, well there's the share, it's been created. So let's go back to Server Manager, and if we click on Show Shared Folders, you can now see the data share there. Of course, the other way of creating a share is to select the New Shared Folder button at the bottom here, and we'll need to provide a couple of things here. First of all, a name for the share, and the path to a folder that you want to share, and finally the permissions. So for the name, I'll give it a name of Reports. For the folder, I'll put that on C:\reports, which I might add isn't a real folder on my server, but that's okay. This wizard will identify that and it'll ask us to create it if we like. And I'll just leave the default here at read-only permissions. We'll click on OK. And right on cue it tells us here that the folder doesn't exist on this server, and that's okay. We'll click Yes to create it. And now we have two shared folders. Now the reality is though that in your already established network, you've probably got a whole bunch of shares already created, probably spread over many different servers, so it's not likely that you'll be doing what I am doing, and that's creating these from scratch. You'll just probably click on Browse and browse for them. So let's just select one of these. We'll select the first one. the data share, we'll click on OK, and you'll notice that this window here is now filled in. The true shared folder is simply /dc1/data. We're going to create a folder called data in our corp namespace, and it's going to be referenced using winstructorlab.com/corp/data. So we'll click on OK. And we'll need to repeat this step for any other shares that we might have. So let's also add in the reports one as well. So we'll click Add, Browse, Show Shared Folders. We'll select Reports and click OK, and OK again. And there's our second folder inside our corp namespace. So we'll move on now and we'll click Next. And we'll get a summary of what we're going to do here, which is to set up our Dfs namespace called winstructorlab.com/corp, and that's great. It's just what we want to do. So we'll click Install. Now, as you'd expect, the installation is going to take a few moments, so I'm going to pause the video here and we'll be back once this is all installed. Okay, well, the installation is complete and successful, so we'll click Close. Now, at this point, our Dfs namespace is live, and to access it, all we need to do is click Start, and we'll type in /winstructorlab.com. In fact, we don't actually even need the .com here. We can just say winstructorlab/corp and hit Enter. And this is going to pop up a new Explorer window here at the root of our Dfs namespace, and immediately you'll notice that we've got our two shares inside here, data and reports. Now, this is all pretty easy to configure, and at this point we only have our two shares at our disposal within our Dfs namespace, data and reports, but we can easily add in more, and the physical shared locations can be anywhere in our network. They don't have to be on this server, which of course is DC1. So let's see how we can do that. Now, in order to manage our Dfs namespace, we'll click on Start, we'll go to Administrative Tools, and we'll launch this new console here, Dfs Management. And the first thing you'll probably notice about this console is that it's one of the newer three-paned ones, whereby on the left here you'll have your Explorer style tree view. In the middle, it's going to show you the configuration options for whatever you've selected on the left-hand side, and on the right here we have the Actions menu. So on the left-hand side of our console, we've got two options, Namespaces and Replication. If we expand Namespaces, there's our corp root namespace, and if we expand that, you'll see the two shares, data and reports listed below. So let's add in a new one. Now, I've already got another shared folder on a member server in my domain, and the server's called member1. So I'm going to right click here on our Dfs namespace called corp, and we'll choose new folder. Then we'll click Add. Now, if you know the name of the share, you could simply type it in here, or you could click the Browse button. And we've seen this window before, which defaults to this server here, DC1. But since the share I want is held on another server, we'd need to click Browse and then locate the server through Active Directory. Now, alternatively, of course, we could enter in the path manually, and that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to click Cancel, Cancel, and we'll enter in the path, which is member1, which is the name of the server, and the share name is called London. So we'll click on OK, and we'll need to give the folder a name, which I'm simply going to call London as well, and then click OK. And over here on the left, there's our London share, which of course isn't stored on this machine at all. It's on a different server in our network, and it could be stored anywhere in the world. It really doesn't matter. The fact is, though, if we switch back to Windows Explorer, you'll see here that inside our corp Dfs namespace, we've now got three shares. We have data and reports, which are real shares that reside on this server that we're on right now, and London, which is a share on a totally different server. Now, from a user's perspective, they can be oblivious as to where the actual shares are located. In fact, they probably don't even care. And why should they care? All a user wants is a location where they can access the files and folders they need to do their jobs. They could probably care less about where they're stored, and that's what's great about DFS. It enables us, the administrators, to manage shares from a single place by bringing them together under a master list, if you like, the Dfs namespace, and this means that users only really ever need to remember one name, and that's Winstructor/Corp in this case, and all of the other shares fall into place under this banner, and that saves users from trying to remember probably dozens of different server and share names. So if we open up the London folder here, we'll take a quick look inside. You can see that I've got a single text document inside here, just so you know that this is the London share, which is of course stored on a remote server. Now, one other really important part of DFS is replication. Now let's assume for the sake of the argument that we're located in New York, and that's where the data and the report shares are also located. Now this means that since the actual shares are located locally to us, they should be pretty quick to access the data inside, as we're using local LAN speeds to access these two folders. But since the London share is located in, well, London I guess, we'll be using slower WAN links to access the data inside this shared folder, which of course makes it slower for us, but fast for the local London people, which of course have the opposite problem to us, whereby the data and the reports folders are going to be slow for them, as they'll be pulling data from these two folders over WAN links, but anything from the London folder will then be at local LAN speeds for them. Now, replication is the technology that allows us to solve this problem, as it enables us to replicate the data in shares across to the other folders. That way we can have a copy of the London shares data stored locally on our server, and they can have the data and reports folders replicated over to their server in London. So let's go back to Windows Explorer and our C drive here, and we're going to right click and we'll create a new folder which I'm going to call London. Now we're going to right click on this London folder and we're going to choose to share that folder out, and we'll do the same as before. We'll give everyone co-owner access to this share. We'll click share and then done. Essentially what we have now is a mirrored share of the London share on this server here, DC1, except of course this share has nothing in it at this stage. So to replicate the data inside the real London share, we'll go back to the Dfs Management console and we'll right click on our London share. Since this is the master folder, if you like, it's the one with all the files and folders in it, and we'll choose Add Folder Target. Now the folder target is going to be this server here, so we're going to enter in this server's name, which is DC1/London, which is the name of the share we just created a moment ago, of course, and we'll click OK. Now we're asked if we want to create a replication group, which we will need if we're planning on keeping the data inside these two London folders synchronized. So we're going to say yes, and I should make mention that if you get an error here, it's more than likely that you haven't installed DFS on one of the servers involved in this transaction. So just make sure that you have installed the DFS role service on both servers that are configured here, or you're going to have problems. Now, assuming that you have DFS installed on both, this will fire up a new wizard where we'll be configuring our replication group, and this defaults to using the replication group of our domain, Corp, London, and it's going to be using the folder name of London, and there's no surprises there really, so we'll click Next. It shows us here which shared folders will be included in this replication group, and there's both of the folders that we've already created. The London folder here on this server that I created a moment ago, and the real one, the one on our member1 server, which as we said was the actual share located in London. No surprises there either, so we'll click Next. Now here's where we'll need to select which share is the primary one, or the master one, the one which we want to replicate to the other one. Now obviously in my case the share member1, which is our London server, is the master at this point. It's the one that's got the data on it, and we'll want to replicate this to DC1. Now we definitely don't want to replicate the other way around, or we'll be replicating a share which has nothing in it over the top of a share that has our data. So we'll carefully select member1 and we'll click Next. And by the way, don't think that member1 is always going to be the master. This setting back here is only for the initial replication. Once this is all set up, if we create a file on DC1 for argument's sake, then it will be replicated to member 1, and vice versa. We're only concerned with the initial replication right here. Okay, here's where we'll need to select which topology we want to use with our replication group. And the only option we have here is full mesh, and that's what we'll choose since it's the topology type whereby each server is going to replicate with each other. Do take note though that if we did have 3 or more replication partners, we could use the hub and spoke topology type, where we'd have a central hub member which we'd consider to be the master and then replicate out to the spoke partners. And this would typically be a good choice when you've got a central share that you want to be replicated to a lot of remote sites. Well, anyway, since our only choice we have here is full mesh, we're going to leave the default at that and click next. Now, as far as replication bandwidth goes, do we want changes to be replicated on the fly, live as they occur, or do we want to schedule replication to occur at a specific time or interval, such as outside of business hours where our links probably aren't being used quite so heavily? Now, obviously, what you select here comes down to 2 things. How much bandwidth you're willing to let replication consume when it needs to update a file from one share to another server, which in my case happens to be on the other side of the world in this theoretical example. Now, if this is a share that's updated a lot, then this could quite possibly consume a lot of bandwidth by replicating the files over to the other side of the world. Now, sure, we could limit the amount of bandwidth that this feature is going to use, but nevertheless, it does mean potentially a lot of data traveling back and forth, which means your WAN links are going to be slower. Now, if we choose to schedule these changes, then that means that we could minimize the amount of bandwidth that our replication will use so that it's outside of business hours and not so likely to impact our daily performance. But of course, the downside is that the data in the share might not be as fresh and up to date, since a change could have been made 8 hours ago to any document that we want to open now, but since replication occurs overnight, we'll only see the old version of the document until we come back to work tomorrow morning. So it really comes down to a performance issue versus an up-to-date data issue really, and whatever you choose here is going to come down to your business requirements. Now for me, I like up-to-date data, so I'm going to choose the top option, and that's probably what you'll choose too. But of course, we can limit the replication to a specific amount of bandwidth if we like. Now, since in reality, both of my servers here are on my local LAN, I'm going to leave the default here at full bandwidth and click next. Alright, well, we're done here. We've got our summary, which you can review at your own leisure. We'll click create, and the wizard's going to go off and set up the things that we just told it to, and you can see that it's pretty quick there. It's done. We've got a bunch of green ticks telling us that our changes were completed successfully, so we'll click close. Now, since this is our first time setting this replication up, we're told that replication won't actually begin until the configuration's been picked up by the 2 servers in our replication group, and it's also going to depend on the polling intervals configured in Active Directory. So there's nothing we really need to do here. Just click OK and wait, and replication is going to take care of itself. So let's go and switch over to our London folder here and see what's going on. Since if replication's already taken place, we'd expect to see our text file in our London share copied over, or more specifically, replicated here to our DC1 server. Alright, well, the file's not there yet, and I'm not really upset by that. I'll expect that somewhere in the next 5 to 10, 15 minutes, this text file is going to be replicated over to our DC1 server. And this initial replication can take a little while, so I'm going to pause the video here. Okay, well, there it is. The text file that was originally inside our London share on our member 1 server is now here as well in our London share on our DC1 domain controller, since replication has now taken place and we have a copy locally. Although, if in your company you've switched over to the replication target and you've found that the data hasn't replicated yet, don't stress, because replication will normally take around 15 minutes to complete anyway, and much longer if it's replicating over WAN links. So be prepared to wait quite a while for the initial replication period, so just be patient and give it time to do its thing. Now, the advantage of this is that now Active Directory can decide when we attempt to access this shared London folder, which share it needs to direct us to behind the scenes when we try and access it. It's going to take a look at where these two folders are and the cost associated with accessing each one, and the one that it determines to be the lower cost, which of course is going to be whichever one is closest to us, it's going to direct us to that share. Now, your users probably won't know which folder they're accessing, and again, they couldn't care less either. They've probably got no idea that there is two London shares at all, since all they see is this one London folder. But in reality, there are two, one on either side of the world, but both are updated with each other, so almost at all times, the folders will be identical, perhaps with the exception of when files are being replicated. But for the most part, these two folders are always going to be the same. Now this is pretty cool. We've got two servers here dishing out the exact same data. And this provides us with fault tolerance, especially where the data itself is concerned, since we've got two copies of the data on two separate servers. And that means that if DC1 goes down, we've still got the same data accessible on member1. Now the problem is though, that the data here has fault tolerance, but our Dfs namespace itself doesn't. And this is a common mistake. We've got two copies of the data on two separate servers, so we must be okay if one of these servers goes down, right? Well, yes and no. If member1 goes down, our users really won't be affected since the data is freely available here on DC1. But if DC1 goes down, we've got a problem since this is the only server that knows about where all our shares are located. So here inside our DFS console, if we select our Dfs namespace and in the middle here click on Namespace Servers, you'll see that our entire namespace is stored on this server DC1. This means that if this server is the only server that knows where all our shares are located and it goes down, well, if your users can't remember the name of the server and the name of the share that they've been using, using the old method, and that's not likely if they've been using DFS for a while, so if winstructor/lab/corp is all they know, then you've got a problem. Now there's two solutions to this problem. One of them is an easy fix, the other is a pain in the backside to set up, but both of them do have their advantages. Now one solution is to make this a single DFS namespace and use clustering to provide fault tolerance to this server. Now another, and definitely an easier method, is to create another namespace server. And the good news? It can be any server that's running Windows 2008. So I'm going to use my member1 server here, so I'm going to right click on our winstructor/lab/corp namespace, and we're going to choose the second option here to add a namespace server. We'll click the Browse button. I'm going to type in MEM and we'll click Check Names. It comes back with member1, so we'll click on OK and OK one more time. And that's it. It's a pretty easy fix. It took about 30 seconds to configure it, and that's including taking the time to explain it. Notice that we are told on member1 here that the DFS service isn't running, so to start it up and set it to automatic, so it automatically starts when member1 is rebooted, we'll need to click yes. Okay, we're done. Very, very easy. And now if either of these two servers goes down, it doesn't matter since both of them are able to perform the job of each other. We've now got fault tolerance on both the data itself and the namespace since we've got two servers with the exact same information. But do remember though that in order for this to work, you will need to have installed the DFS role service on both servers that you plan on hosting the DFS namespace on. And that should go without saying really that DFS needs to be installed on any server that's going to be participating in the holding of a DFS namespace. But it's something that I have seen before, so bear that in mind. DFS needs to be installed on both machines, and we've already seen how to do that earlier in this video. Now that we have these two servers actively participating in DFS, like I said, if one of them goes down, the shares will stay up. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on Start, and we'll open up a command prompt, and we'll shut down the server member1 right from here. In fact, before I do that, what I'm going to do is ping member 1 so you can see the moment when it goes down. So we're going to type in ping member 1 and we're going to add in a -T switch here, and the -T is simply telling ping that we want to issue a continuous ping, so it's going to continue pinging member 1 until we stop this command. So I'm going to open up another command prompt now, and I'm just going to position it so we can see the ping happening here in the background. And inside this command prompt, I'm going to type in shutdown/T 1/M, and then the name of the server, which is member 1/S. Now what we're doing here is telling our shutdown command to shut down the server called member 1. The /T switch is setting a timer of 1 second before we'll shut down member 1, and the /S is to tell the server to shut down dead and not restart, in which case if we wanted it to restart, we'd type in a /R. So we're going to hit enter, and member 1 should go down in a few moments. So let's switch here to our other command prompt, and hopefully you're going to see in a moment that our member server 1 is going to go down and these pings are now starting to fail. Now, our pings are starting to fail, and of course that means that member 1 has been shut down, or at the very least, it's well on its way to be turned off completely since we've lost network connectivity with it. Now that's good, because I've now switched over to another machine in my network here, a Windows Vista machine. So let's see if we can access the Dfs namespace from here, and more importantly, the shared files. So we're going to click on Start, and we'll type in winstructor lab/corp, and we'll hit enter. And since one of our servers is down, it might take a little longer than usual to fire up, since it's going to figure out that member 1 isn't responding, and hopefully it'll connect to DC1 instead. Okay, well, here's the Dfs namespace, and there's also the 3 folders that we've been using in this video. So let's open up one. Let's choose the London folder, and there's our file. So we know that DFS is working fine, and we've got our fault-tolerant shared folders freely available. Actually, whilst we're here, I should point out that if it isn't obvious, you can set up a shared folder to our corp namespace by clicking on Start. We'll right-click on Computer and choose Map Network Drive. Then we'll give this share a drive letter, and I'll leave the default at Z. That's fine by me. But for the folder, it's going to be winstructor lab/corp, and I'm going to leave this box here checked, which will reconnect to this shared location each time we log onto this computer, and we'll click Finish. Alright, well, there's our folder, and if we go back to Computer, we can see the shared folder listed here, which will now appear each time we restart this machine. So, really cool news. We now have one single location where we can find all of our shared data, and it's fault tolerant, as you've seen. That's really nice. Okay, well, the last thing we're going to do in this video is poke around a little bit inside this DFS console, as there are a couple of other things within the console that I know you'll just be dying to learn. Now, on the left-hand side of our console here, if we expand replication, you'll note that we've got 2 sub-options here, domain system volume and our replicated folder called London. Since this server that I'm on right now is a domain controller, this domain system volume you see here, this will appear, but on a member server, you're not going to see it. Now, the reason that you see it on a domain controller is that, believe it or not, any domain controller you have is already using DFS to replicate the contents of the sysvol folder to other domain controllers. And this replication of the sysvol folder occurs behind the scenes, so you don't have to install DFS as a role or anything to get it working. It's something that automatically happens when you install the domain services role. But like I said, behind the scenes, DFS is the technology that makes this replication happen, and that's why you're seeing it listed here. Now, if we click on the London namespace, you're going to see here in the middle of this console that we have 2 members that are participating in this replication, DC1 and member 1. Now, on the Connections tab, we can see these same 2 participating members, And also take note here that if we right click on either of these two members, we can force replication to happen. But since we've chosen to set replication to a full-time setting, we probably really would never need to utilize this option, but this would really have a strong benefit if we're using scheduled replication and you want to force replication to happen now when you might need data to be replicated immediately. So that's a useful option there. Now that's pretty much all you need to know about DFS replication, truth be told. There's quite a lot of options in this console that we haven't really talked about, but they're all based around adding another folder or another server to our DFS namespace, and that's something that we've talked about and we've seen how to do anyway. So we hope you've enjoyed this video and would like to thank you for watching.